Welcome Congressman Pete Sessions and Sarah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Very excited today to be having a conversation with Texas Congressman Pete Sessions, member of the House Oversight Committee, chairman of the Subcommittee on Government Operations and the Workforce. Congressman Sessions has been very deeply involved in the Hunter Biden investigations, and we're going to get into some of the details in the work of the committee. But to start off, we are consistently still hearing from Democrats that there's no evidence Joe Biden was ever involved in his son's foreign business dealings. For the no evidence crowd, why don't we lay out a little bit of the case that Joe Biden was in fact involved in some of these things, and that a lot of that is the work of your committee.
Sarah, thank you very much. It is up to this committee that constitutionally has the jurisdiction to not only achieve the things that we're doing, but to also follow the pathway that was well-worn rut that the Democrats did when they had this same committee working with the Department of Justice, working to prosecute officials within the department. So we believe we're entitled to the same relationship with the Department of Justice, the same request to be honored, and in fact, we're not. So we have had to go about what is a very deliberate, cautious, and careful underpinning of going and asking questions. In fact, the largest question is not necessarily tell us about the direct relationship and link with this money and the president, even though I can come to Colorado and be asked that. The real question that we've got to get into is, why did for 5 years, why was this hidden? What did the internal Treasury people do? What did the Department of Justice do? What did the FBI do? And we have begun to learn a lot of these answers as a result of whistleblowers. Whistleblowers who have come to not just Congress, but really publicly been available to discuss the intricacies of their job. And the facts of the case are real simple. We had an IRS whistleblower, 2 of them, that detailed in great measure about the things that had been going on where they were receiving these reports, SARs, that come from foreign transactions. They might be called SWIFT code transactions that came to banks, and banks questioned those because you see the Department of Treasury has oversight over banks if they do not report these suspicious activity reports. And hundreds of these reports became available to prosecutors and to the Department of the Treasury that they should have picked up on very quickly, but they chose not to. They chose to ignore them. And so the direct link that we would have with the president, with the other Biden family members, comes through a very detailed, intricate process whereby they used hundreds of LLCs to hide the money and to move this money across the Biden network. We call it the Biden criminal network because, in fact, going back to 2017, these payments, we think up to some $40 million, flowed directly to the Biden crime syndicate. And in that process, now we are being asked to please show the direct relationship where it went to the big guy, where it went to the chairman of the board. And in fact, we will get that done. But we will get that done in a way that means that we must have the respect of Article 2, which is this administration. And we have begun that deep dig to find out, and going up the chain, who saw this information, who attempted to move it back and not move forward, and who made the decisions, in essence, to make sure this did not get the light of day. So, to answer your question, no, We do not have that direct link, but it is available to us and would be available to the Department of Justice, to the FBI, and to the IRS. And it's from a very large data center that is in Utah that contains all sorts of data and information, including where cell phones were together. And we're being denied that access. We believe we will ultimately be able to ask the questions, don't know what the answer is, where they will have to produce the information about who was present with Hunter Biden when this one particular transaction took place. We believe there are multiple, and we intend to stay after that, Sarah.
And it wasn't just Congress that was denied access to that geolocation data. Thanks to the IRS whistleblowers, we now know that criminal investigators were also not allowed to access that while they were investigating Hunter Biden years ago. Part of what it seems like the House Oversight Committee has done, I think intelligently, is to sort of to get around the Biden administration stonewalling. It seems like the Oversight Committee has gone outside of government to get some of its information from witnesses like Devin Archer, Hunter Biden's former business partner, and from private banks. The Oversight Committee has subpoenaed bank records for Hunter Biden's former business partners, right? But not necessarily for the Biden family members themselves yet. Is that something that's on the horizon for the committee?
It could be. The conversation that is taking place with Hunter Biden's visits to federal district courts, we believe have been not only shallow, but intentionally placed where he got a sweetheart deal, a VIP entrance, not only to where his indictment was not public, but the whole moving forward process was not. And then to announce, well, the statute of limitations, we believe, has passed. But in fact, up and down the entire chain of events, there are questions that we've got to get into. So you're asking great questions, Sarah, and each of you are entitled to know those answers too. But the President of the United States has not been forthright. In fact, he did say, I've had no dealings with my son in any business. And yet there are plenty of legitimate accounts of Hunter Biden going to 10 and 15 and 20 official trips with his father, only to find out that those correspond to money that he has received. Why wasn't Hunter Biden held accountable if he received this money for doing the things that would be required to sign up as an agent for these foreign governments and foreign people? Because that's where the money came. So this is not a straight line, and it does take discipline. It takes a bit of time. And I would remind each of you to know this. We do understand this is a crux of a criminal investigation. And that is why they're trying so diligently to stay after Republicans and the former President of the United States.
Part of what unraveled Hunter Biden's plea deal on that July 26th hearing was when the judge started asking questions of prosecutors about whether Hunter Biden was still vulnerable to criminal prosecution under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA violations, and prosecutors said yes. We know that the Justice Department in recent years has stepped up enforcement of FARA, and there's a lot of evidence just in the public sphere right now that there were potential FARA violations here. Is that something that your committee is looking at in addition to what the Justice Department has done or not done to investigate?
It would be central to that theme because, in fact, the discussions were with official government officials. That is who Vice President Biden had these meetings with. It started with official contacts within those governments who then found a way to funnel money. We believe that the Vice President, then Vice President Biden, really threatened these other countries in a circumstance about outing them for their misdeeds. And that was the crux of what this started as. But we've got a long way to go. And until we move up that chain and get the data and information which we are entitled to, we will not know for sure.
You mentioned the dozens of trips that Hunter Biden took on Air Force Two, on Air Force One, with his son. 5 of those were to China. And, one of the clearest examples of Joe Biden having lied during the 2020 race was when he said on the debate stage with Donald Trump that no one in his family had ever taken a dime from China. That's been proven very false, a lot of which was from the work from the House Oversight Committee, getting bank transactions that really proved that false. How concerning is the work that the Biden family did in China, given that Joe Biden is now in charge of managing U.S. foreign policy to a country that could, frankly, have compromised him?
Well, it's material to the case, and that is that we have the President of the United States who is willing to be compromised against the best interest of the United States. Some might call that treason, perhaps you would. But what it is a violation of federal law. And we do see where we have been sending people who took a role and were combative against these other countries, actually threatened them in order to achieve a personal benefit. And that personal benefit is how he has received, and the family, some $40 million.
In all of the work that you've done, digging through these Biden family records, talking to witnesses, have you ever gotten a clear picture of what Hunter Biden actually did for all of that money? Was there ever a service provided, a skill that he had? Was that ever clear?
Well, I think it was a plan and a process that was concocted within the administration, or at least by the Bidens, to allow them to pick the countries that they would go to and to specifically pick what those issues would be. Hunter Biden, as we have learned, is a drug addict, is a philanderer. He is misfit for service, and yet he went on official visits and in the room with his father. What I would say to you is, yes, we do believe that we're going to draw that direct link. It's a prima facie case. You think you can see it, but in fact, they're forcing us, the media is forcing us to go and prove this direct link. There have been enough examples that you have seen up to and including at the time of the election where Vice President Biden and candidate Biden affirmed to the country that there were these huge numbers of intelligence people who said that any relationship that the Hunter Biden laptop had of being true is false. And in fact, CBS and the other major networks, including the New York Times, have now had to come back and say they were wrong. Well, in fact, this entire charade is somehow to protect President Biden. And the American people should know that the House Government Reform Committee, James Comer, our chairman, and I, and others will stay after this. But it is going to take fights probably in and through the courts, as the Democrats achieved also.
The Justice Department, the State Department, the Treasury Department were all very cooperative and defensive of separation of powers and constitutional duties to hand over information when the investigations were into Trump-Russia collusion, for example, or the January 6th situation. Is there a way for you to sort of point out in the judiciary that double standard that's being applied to the constitutional powers of congressional oversight?
Well, in fact, and I've had conversation with you and several other people who are sitting at a back table about the need for us to make sure that we are not going to be, in essence, taken advantage of. As you suggest, the Government Reform and Oversight Committee under Nancy Pelosi did engage in huge numbers of informational subpoenas and things which they did achieve, and they turned that directly over to the Department of Justice, whether it be about the impeachment of the president in 2019 or whether it be about January 6th. The official resources and the sharing of information on criminal matters between these two entities, the United States Congress and the Department of Justice, was a cozy relationship. We have not been able to have even a relationship where we were able to talk directly two people because we're told it's part of a continuing criminal investigation. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is done so that they do not have to speak or provide us data and information. And if you think that that is one way to do business, you are wrong. Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3 in our specific jurisdictional endeavors should share this information to the benefit of this country. They call it freedom, which is right in front of you, but it's also a rule of law. And we are going to have to understand that the Department of Justice does not want to crack on this issue, and it's going to take us going to the courts with some understanding, and actually a federal judge. I've lived with a federal judge. My father was a federal judge for 14 years, and even though the people they were after were drug cartels, there still is a relationship that must be had between the Congress to change the laws and to understand the threats against this country. Up to and including my father was FBI director for President Reagan, President Bush, and President Clinton, to understand what the needs of the nation are and the needs to make sure that we avoid corruption at the highest levels of this government is critical because the world is watching also.
Let's talk about Special Counsel David Weiss. He has been credibly accused of overseeing a lot of misconduct over the past few years by IRS whistleblowers. Nothing that's emerged from various tentacles of the congressional investigation, of the court record that is, as Hunter Biden has entered his plea agreement, have contradicted anything the whistleblowers have said. Republicans had for years called for the appointment of a special counsel, that if this wasn't a textbook case that required a special counsel to prevent conflicts of interest, nothing would be. And yet, when David Weiss was named, there's been a lot of criticism because he's involved in that misconduct. What do you think about the appointment of David Weiss?
Well, the appointment must come under the law. And in fact, the Attorney General attempted to fool the American public and to allude to the law and the title. Well, the Attorney General of the United States, among all people, should be very careful about what the intent of his words are. It is not a part of the law. He is not legally empowered to do this, and it would take a court to challenge that jurisdiction. In fact, he does not have that as provided by the law. So we believe it was done in a way so that he would not have to come and offer us, respond to a subpoena by the House of Representatives. So this was done as a convenience by the Attorney General to keep that lid off data and information. So they've said that he would assume this new role. And that new role, in fact, should not be one that we pry with, but it should be under the law, and that has to be a person outside of government who is prepared to come as an independent person to lead that investigation. So it's fraught with problems, and we are having problems, and we're struggling, which has brought each of you really to the table today as patriots to understand there is something wrong, and it is called rule of law. And rule of law is not being followed, and our country is divided in the judiciary also. So we will continue this discipline. We will not make charges or claims that we cannot prove. But when you have bank records from someone else that are official part of the records, we did not make those up. The evidence is there, and we ultimately will stay after this and have the discipline to run it all the way to ground.
What kinds of specific questions do you have for U.S. Attorney, now Special Counsel David Weiss? Are there specific episodes that the committee is interested in? For example, the Assistant U.S. Attorney Leslie Wolf's decision to tip off Hunter Biden's legal team that the FBI was coming to interview him, or the decision to squash a search warrant for a storage unit that Hunter Biden had? What are some of the specific episodes that your committee is interested in asking Weiss about?
In fact, as you suggest, it is a trail of deceit up and down. The questions that need to be asked are those that we've heard for a long time. What did you know, and when did you know it? What did you do about it? How did you follow professional guidance that came from the IRS, that have criminal investigators that have a long history of following the law, following the transactions, seeing where it leads. They know they were cut off at the first pass. They gathered the information, but were told, we don't know by whom exactly, but we know that the assistant U.S. attorney that engaged in this came in because it was seen as a criminal investigation against the Vice President of the United States some years ago. The denial of doing your job, the dereliction of duty, is different than if you misuse your power. But the dereliction of duty goes directly to their oath of office to well and faithfully execute the laws of this country. And in fact, knowing enough about the Department of Justice, it was done to achieve something greater for that individual. That's one thing the Department of Justice has done very well. They take care of those that get it. And so we will begin following that pathway. Once we move a little bit further forward, we're now in the bank transactions and following those, and they keep appearing. So it's a lot of work. It's a lot of asking the IRS and then gaining back, how many of these transactions did you actually have that you were confronted? How many did the assistant U.S. attorney at the time she came in, how many was she aware of? And these are all questions that are material to the case, except you and I both know that it's a sweetheart VIP deal by the Department of Justice and the Department of Treasury for the Biden crime syndicate.
Let's talk about that plea deal. It's been really interesting to see what's transpired since it fell apart in court on July 26th. There's been a back and forth of filings between the Justice Department and Hunter Biden's legal team. And I think it was noteworthy that a few weeks ago, Hunter Biden's top defense attorney, Chris Clark, withdrew from his defense so that he could serve as a witness. And then what I can only presume to be the Hunter Biden legal team leaked details of correspondence that Hunter Biden's defense attorneys in the Justice Department had for months, more than a year in fact, leading up to that plea agreement that showed just how much the Justice Department gave Hunter Biden's team the ability to even write some of the language in it and to shape that lenient plea deal. What do you think about the fact that the Hunter Biden defense team seems like it wants to use the Justice Department's leniency and generosity against it now?
Well, in fact, as you speak, Sarah, we believe this is a true statement. That's that VIP backdoor entrance into the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice will be held accountable. And the Department of Justice, in fact, does have these documents. We've formally notified them that they must keep those documents and keep them for our availability. I will just tell you that the best advice that these committees and others get is very interesting, up to and including the way the January 6th committee handled their business in the House of Representatives on official business, the people who they spoke to, the people who they did not subpoena, and the records that went directly from our committee to the White House to then be held under seal of 40 years where they would not be released. Each of these things suggest they had a deep plan and knew what they were doing. So this is all, without being choreographed, one which involves a web of deceit by a number of people. And so elections have consequences. And when there's an election in 24, we will be back into the same type of circumstance of having, I hope, the records at the Department of Justice, the records at Treasury. And yet I will tell you, right or wrong, you will all recall that then President-elect Trump chose to say, we will not prosecute Hillary Clinton for all the things that she had done that were against the law with her server. He chose to speak, even though he was not an elected official yet, or had not taken the oath of office, he chose to lend a process because he did want to heal the country. And this other administration has chosen to do everything they can do, including the official instruments of government, to hide the things which we might have visibility to. And as you receive visibility, just as we heard here back in 1994 with President Clinton, they are there in the record that are held by Democrats at this point and not to be shared. So there will be, as the old saying goes, I'm from Texas, they'll be hell to pay.
The Justice Department had offered to make The Justice Department had said that Congress could interview David Weiss on September 27th or September 28th, or 2 dates in mid-October, before he was appointed special counsel. Have you heard officially that that offer's been rescinded?
No, but we would gather that, and this is part of the dialogue that goes on, Sarah. In fact, we had already subpoenaed him and asked him to come, and would subpoena him, to come before the committee to explain the intricacies, the details, as a follow-up to our IRS hearing, whistleblower hearing, to fill in the details so that we simply got the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And in fact, the Department of Justice has found a way around that, and that is to illegally apply, unconstitutionally apply something to him. So we think that's what that's about, and in fact, we could not compel him. Common sense would say you cannot compel someone who's engaged in a deep criminal investigation. But that's not what this is about. It's about trying to hide and keep us from gathering information.
Before we get to audience questions, you are the chairman of the subcommittee on the federal workforce and government operations. Can you tell us a little bit about the priorities for your subcommittee right now, what you guys are looking into?
Yes, I can, and thank you. In fact, we recognize we don't have federal employees that are going back to work. That is a cat and mouse game. We have received a good bit of data and information in dealing with the Office of Professional Management, the OPM. We've asked questions of each of the agencies about their policies and about the number of people who are coming. It is well known that Washington, D.C., huge buildings there do not have people coming. We have found out that, in fact, in one of the largest agencies that is in the Ronald Reagan building, over 2.5 years, less than 18% of people came even once to work. And so that has found itself with passport office problems. That's found itself with problems with the IRS. That's found its problems across the government viewpoint of what they're doing. The administration, the chief of staff of the White House announced about a month ago, as a result of our insistence and letters going back and forth, that they were going to encourage agencies to come back to work by September or October. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we will not give up on this. Next, we had a hearing that was really to determine how did we lose $400 billion in the money that the government gave to individuals as a result of the COVID experience we had. And we really found out that, in fact, there was an organization that was established from about 60 people who were hired, minority status. That's good, bring them into government under President Obama. But they were without the ability to have, in essence, an organization. So they formed an organization and ended up being responsible for the front plate, as they said, to provide security for .gov. .gov is a website that people can come into to then access government information as well as to engage with agencies. They had said that they were providing 100% assurance of who people were once they were in .gov. And in fact, that did not happen. That was a bipartisan hearing. The Democrats had ignored these issues for 4 years. We brought them forward, and in fact, it was a fraudulent use of not only government resources, but they lied about what they were doing. And the IRS supposedly took their word, the Department of Justice took their word, all sorts of government agencies, Social Security, and we gave $400 billion to people who had been vetted through the Barack Obama department that they had established of the entrance to .gov. We have done a number of other hearings that are important, that were really laid out in front of us. The Hunter Biden information has required a good bit of time to get to. We will stay after that also, but there's much in front of the committee. And then the last point, which is material to the things that are on the top of your mind, and that is national security documents. We have written a number of agencies and asked them what are their rules and regulations, and what have they found as a result of that in going back over the last few years. And we are sparingly receiving that information, but that is a huge impediment to keeping our secrets and following the laws of this country. So probably in October, you'll be hearing more about that.
Great. Well, let's take some questions from our audience. The first one is, given that a lot of the misconduct that you've described today is in the Justice Department, concentrated in the Justice Department and the FBI, does a potential impeachment inquiry of Attorney General Merrick Garland make more sense than the potential impeachment inquiry of Joe Biden that we hear the Speaker talking about?
Well, whoever asked that, thank you. In fact, there's a strong, what I would say, component when members go back home, of which I go back every weekend. I've never spent a weekend in Washington in 25 years that I have served. And that's because you have a family. They're the other side of the equation on your important responsibilities. In fact, what we want to do is to go deep in the organization and gain the information. Once you find yourself attacking a principal like the Attorney General, you better have the facts of the case. It is easy to see some of the frailties that have occurred and the decisions, but that did not mean that the Attorney General was behind those answers. It means that someone in the Department of Justice, and we have begun to see those people. We've begun to see people who've been in government, who've been moved around, and are people there to achieve the goals without the Attorney General being involved. So I would say thank you. I do not want to go after the President of the United States. I think that is a rabbit hole that will take us a long time, but rather the instruments and the things in government that empowered and allowed these things. And so I would say we're a little bit shy of that, but the more we engage the Attorney General, he is finding ways to effectively block us, because I believe he knows and they know that the Department of Justice has not been faithful to the rule of law.
This next question gets at sort of the political ousting of Joe Biden rather than the sort of technical removal of Joe Biden that an impeachment would entail. And it is also from your former colleague and House freshman classmate, Bob Schaefer. He asks, it seems that national Democratic leadership would throw President Biden under the bus if they can't bury all the evidence that's emerging. There's a lot of time between now and the Democratic National Convention, and no shortage of ambitious wannabes positioning to be called into the game. Governor Gavin Newsom comes to mind. Are there prominent Democrats in Congress who seem likely to lead the mutiny in the event that the evidence against Joe Biden becomes sort of irrefutable in the court of public opinion?
Well, if Bob is here, Bob, I have not seen you during this trip. Bob, I've talked about you 3 times. Then I talked about Bob Beaupre also. So, Bob, I want to renew that friendship with you and thank you. I think it's important for us to know that our Democratic colleagues are aware of what is happening, and they are they are very secure if they stick together, as you heard Dana say last night. If they stick together, everything is going to be okay. As we further develop these issues, it will go into an election year. And those facts and denials would always be laid upon every single Republican member of our conference if it were dealing with any president. Even going back to George W. Bush, they attempted to divide us there. The media is that advocate. And the media will not ask these questions. They will protect them. They will not ask those difficult questions. And you know that. And so the difficult questions are never asked. Yes, I think that we will have votes. And yes, I would suppose that every Democrat will stick together and they're all guilty or none of them are guilty is the way they look at it.
We've talked a lot about the way the Biden administration has obstructed the congressional investigations into the Biden family. This question has to do with whether Democrats on the Oversight Committee have also obstructed your ability to get information or to disseminate that information.
Well, in fact, if you go back to the prior Congress, when Nancy Pelosi was still Speaker, there was regular content of an agreement, not just a government reform and oversight, but also the Intel Committee that you've heard about with members who were there on those committees. A direct relationship with the intelligence organizations of this country, NSA, CIA, FBI. It was a web of complete deceit. What I would say to you is that we are going to have to continue down the pathway that we are and hope that the American people see. And I think we've still got to go sell this case, but the American people see that inflation, millions of people coming into this country illegally, fentanyl deaths, inflation, all these things, and not even going to work by this government, that they have, that the job is bigger than they are, and that people's lives are greatly impacted. In Texas last week, and I have portions of deep East Texas, there is a county that has 70,000 illegal squatters onto a large piece of land. These are 70,000 people of undocumented people who are living there in our midst. They are going to New York City. They are going to Chicago. We just added another 45,000 people last month that came across Yuma, Arizona alone. Once you get into the 7, 8, 9, 10 million people who are coming here, it is creating an untenable problem for cities also. So I think we'll be able to sell that as a reason why we need to change the direction. But this other issue, and that is of the continuing criminal enterprise by the Department of Justice and by the Bidens, is something that they're going to make us struggle with. And we'll simply have to be doggedly staying after it.
This question is about how the Hunter Biden case might affect foreign lobbying in the future. There are a lot of consulting firms in D.C. that do what Hunter Biden did, essentially. They register, most of them, under the laws. But how do you think the Hunter Biden case might change the way that the influence peddling industry works?
I believe that when you go with official resources, as opposed to perhaps showing up with the ability to make these contacts, there is a difference. There's a difference if you served in the United States military as a general officer, where you had direct contact with military attachés, military chiefs of staff, military people. I think our military, I think our State Department, and I think the Executive Office of the President and the Vice President should undergo a new line and level of thinking, just like we will with the next FBI director and the next attorney general. They have raised the bar on questions that need to be asked, and no longer is it sufficient to say, as they raise their hand, will you well and faithfully execute the laws of the United States? In fact, it's going to take people who will pledge themselves to that. I would go back again. My father was fired by Bill Clinton because he and Janet Reno got into fights that Janet Reno wanted the FBI to do things that now the FBI routinely does, that are politically based, that are not in the best interest of the FBI, and that they hide themselves behind a term criminal investigation, and in fact then report to the Department of Justice and back each other up as buddies. I believe that we're going to have to, instead of complaining about this, set a new level or standard of the kind of person that would be approved to be Attorney General, that would be approved and confirmed as the FBI director. But we're also going to have to place upon those organizations a new oath of office, in addition to the oath of office that they take, and that is to actively understand that within the Bureau, and it's difficult because this could happen within the police departments, it hits at the gut level, we're going to have people turn other people in. We're going to have people understand that the American public, our freedom, the word that you've all become accustomed to here again, is at risk. We are at risk of losing what has been the greatest nation in the world. I think I'm not the first person to say that to you, but we're going to have to place that upon people who are empowered to look after our country's biggest secrets.
There are several questions here from audience members who are concerned about the ability of the Biden administration to run out the clock, essentially. The elections next year could see a change in control of the House that could put an effective end to the investigations. What is the committee doing to ensure that the next election won't make all of this work be in vain?
Well, now that's a separate issue. That is all on the integrity of the election systems that we have. That is also in my purview, and in fact, something that I take very seriously. We are well in the process of working with states. You saw last year were states, including Georgia, a state of Texas, my home state, and other states attempted to pass laws that were not new, that simply said the law cannot be moved around. You cannot go and invent through a process where many governors did intentionally, where they formed a commission who made recommendations that the governor followed, and it all goes to the integrity of what was the post office and these ballots arriving on time. Make no mistake about it, every single action that is taken, there's an equal and opposite reaction by the Democratic Party to change the underpinnings of that. But we too have to be smart. And we too have to be smart and don't tell people go on the last day, the last 3 hours, so that they can't mess up our vote. Well, in one state in particular, there were 40 and 50,000 people that showed up late in the day, and then they got tired of standing in the heat and said, we're going to win, and they left. And 12,000 votes did make a difference. So I just think we've got to have more common sense in what we're doing. It is not our vote they deny, it is the extraneous votes they bring in. So if we make our case and show up on the first day and vote and do these things, if we do not allow governors to extend periods of times and the way things are done, the example would be Georgia. They built these boxes, drop boxes, that were fully utilized for fraud. So we've got to go back to the integrity of the system that we have and make it work that way. I am responsible for that.
I'll close with this. You've several times mentioned that the media is not helpful in covering the Hunter Biden story, to put it charitably. And it is a very complicated story, right? We're talking about 20 shell companies, most of them formed after Joe Biden became vice president. We're talking about really convoluted transactions with multiple countries, multiple oligarchs, and Joe Biden participating in a handful of meetings where he has plausible deniability. There's a lot of pieces of the puzzle. How do you, as a Republican member of the Oversight Committee, and how do other Republicans sell that story to the American people and explain to them why they should care about something when it doesn't fit in a 30-second soundbite? It is a really complicated story.
Well, in fact, what you say is correct. James Comer, who is our young chairman, went back in January and looked at the number of presentations, articles, radio shows, TV that covered the Hunter Biden off MSNBC, NBC, CBS, ABC, off those other channels, as compared to those that would be on Fox, as opposed to those that would be on Newsmax, One American Network, and it was like a night and day relationship. If you have ever made the mistake to watch MSNBC, all they talk about and have for years, they don't cover the news, they cover Donald Trump. They cover, quote, MAGA Republicans. They cover what might be where perhaps 25 and 30 of our members might be, and they pick those out and then go about assassinating them on TV every day. That is meant to drive the print media for where they'll go, and then unfortunately our members enjoy being at the end of the diving board and the attention. We've got to go to where we're very disciplined, where we keep our mouths shut, to where we go after the things we've got to and gain the evidence. And we have to be just like a criminal investigator. We must understand that we don't crow as soon as we learn one thing, but rather bring the body of evidence forward. I think that's what we're going to do. You're about to stop us, I guess. I want to thank this audience. As a member of Congress, we cannot do what we're doing without the people that are in this room and others. We cannot continue. I've met several people from Dallas, which I represented for 22 years, and they wanted to think everything was okay, but in fact I saw the things that were coming against us. We still, even in Texas, could lose. And if we lose Texas, we lose the country. But what I would say to you is the same kind of professionalism that you saw exhibited here by our young people should give you evidence that this organization is worthy to support, that they're growing not just thought leaders, but people who will put pen to paper. I would say to you, I graduated from Southwestern University in Georgetown, Texas, my brothers and I, and we all read something that was from Hans Morgenthau called The Art of Politics. I would encourage each of you to have some basis of understanding that is a broad base to where you can know what your fundamental beliefs are. I am a Ronald Reagan advocate. I believe that Ronald Reagan was right, but I pin myself off Hans Morgenthau, Art of Politics. I encourage you, please read these young people who you've heard today and help us sell that story. By the way, Bob Schaefer, Christy Noem's supposed to be here. These were have been my colleagues, and you sent them there. When I was chairman of the National Republican Congressional Committee in 2010, we went about an effort 40 seats back. We won by net 63 because we went directly at Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats and sold the fight about freedom. I want you to know that we will always have a new crop of people in Congress. We will always have people who show up. Please keep sending us your brightest and your best. I really appreciate every one of you and for the words that you exhibit about what's in your heart. I will just tell you, my father passed away several years ago at age 90. And I had a conversation, a deep conversation with my dad. I was the last of the guys to get married, so he and I went to Mount Everest. He and I went to Mount Rainier. He and I went to Philmont Scout Ranch. He and I had a chance to do things together later where I was more of an adult instead of a child. And I will tell you that what burns deep in your heart and in your soul is American exceptionalism. I hope you will take that as a pride of authorship that you've got to go sell, just like Bob Schaefer showing up 15 years later after he left because he's still worried about America, one nation under God. I hope you'll remember that.
Thank you, Congressman.
You're the.
Thank you, Congressman Sessions.